Android Blues. Oh, I should have practiced. Never mind.
Hello, drunk duckers. This is the QUACKCAST. This is QUACKCAST number 435. And that's the sound of Baines dumping out his money because he has to go and buy a coffee. He's less like
Cannot change.
he's not sure whether he's got enough money. He needs these coffees to get by in the QUACKCAST, or else, just won't work. But this week we're going to be talking about spin-offs. Spin-offs in comics. Or spin-offs in everything, because I think none of us really know that much about comics in order for us, especially webcomic spin-offs. That's a fairly rare thing. Because of factors. There are factors why spin-offs in webcomics are not as popular, not as prevalent, I should say, as spin-offs in normal comics. But before we get into that, I have to bring up the featured comic. The featured comic this week was a feature that I featured. Android Blues. So take it away, Android Blues. Hello, I'm Ozone Ocean, and my feature for the week was Android Blues. In a grim, gritty, neon-lit Hong Kong, the world is about to explode, teetering on the very brink of World War III and nuclear catastrophe. The future is in the hands of one crazed amnesiac, super sexy android and a determined police detective who's trying to hunt her down. If only Lisa can manage to keep her clothes on. It's a four-way battle between the Triads, the Hong Kong police, the Chinese army, and a mysterious hit squad led by a sexy, psychotic cyborg. Android Blues is an ultra-violent, super sexy, realistic, cyberpunk, sci-fi story in the style of Blade Runner, Neuromancer, and Ghost in the Shell. You better be ready for blood and frequent nudity. This one is definitely an M-rated comic, so beware. The art is very realistic. It's beautiful with bright neon effects and soft colours. The story is fast-paced, action-filled, and it reminds me of something from Heavy Metal. If you remember those comics that went all the way, they didn't pull punches like American comics typically do. They just, they follow the sexuality, nudity, violence, everything like that. They go all the way. They're really European in style. And this is what this comic reminds me of, a very European style. It's by Stahlberg, and it's rated M. Android Blues. Read it. And that was the featured comic, Android Blues. Next up, we have the music. Gummalus has given us the theme to The Great Khan. The Great Khan. And with a title like that, you'd think it's going to be like, oh my god, the start of Led Zeppelin's Kashmir or something. Da-da-dun, da-da-dun. Da-da-dun-dun-dun-dun. No, but it's not really.
Oh, yeah.
It's just sort of a funny comic. It's not really that. The music is chosen is A Happy Fun Jollity. This one bounces through your door with glee and excitement, happy to see you and wanting no more than a snack and a belly rub. A happy little dance number. And you may remember this theme as well from Motivational House Cat. So there's a bit of a new take. It's spin-off. So we got the same theme, but it's been spun off into a new piece. So that's interesting. So take it away, Gummels, with The Great Khan. That was the music by Gumwallers. The Great Khan. The Great Khan.
Shere Khan.
Shere
Khan.
Khan!
I love him. That put me in mind of actually thinking of Khans. There was a Khan sort of character in Conan the Barbarian, which I like that movie. It's one of my favorite movies with Arnold Schwarzenegger and all sorts of fantastic people. The guy who played Darth Vader's in there as well. James Earl Jones is in a proper role. Anyway, so that's a real fun kind of movie, Conan. And that, of course, there's a spin-off from that, Red Sonja. So Red Sonja is a spin-off of that, and she became her own sort of world and her own character. And that is an incredibly fascinating story behind that, because the writer, Robert E. Howard, she wrote all these stories in the 1930s, and they're all little short stories and stuff. And he wrote a story called Red Sonja, which was, he wrote Conan stories, he wrote Red Sonja as well. So Red Sonja is nothing to do with Conan whatsoever. She's sort of set in the 16th century. She's an Austrian woman fighting the Austro-Hungarian, fighting the Turkish Ottoman hordes as they try and ravage across Europe. And yeah, so she's fighting with guns and all this kind of stuff. And that was spelled S-O-N Y-A. So yeah, that's where that comes from. But when the comics, they became like the stories became an IP, and that was sort of owned by various people, and they had their own take on it, and then it went in and became a comic. And they quickly ran out of original Robert E. Howard stories, and you have other writers doing more comics and more things. And then they introduced this Red Sonja character. So she's based on the name of this character, but spelt with a J instead of a Y. And so yeah, she sort of roughly based on Howard's character, but she's also based on other Howard characters like Belit, this Jewish Jewess pirate queen. So she's based on her, and Valeria, which was this other fantastic Howard character. So she's all those, and she's spun off into a comic of her own. So it's weird how those kind of things sort of grow. It's like that's really the essence of spin-offs. It's in that you've sort of got ideas, and you're wanting to hammer them all into the same world. It doesn't matter. You're bringing them everywhere, and you're just like hammering them all in the same world, and you're sort of keeping it in the same world. Like, even though it could be its own thing, like have no relation to anything else, you just want to keep going with new ideas in the same world, which is that's an interesting notion, and it's a good way of understanding spin-offs. It's you've got new ideas, but you want to keep them in the same place. It's not necessarily that, often we think about spin-offs as thinking, this character grew so much that they deserve their own story. I don't think that happens as much in spin-offs. It's more like you have other ideas, but you want to keep it within the same world. So you sort of work out ways of doing it that way. That's how I think about it anyway. What do you guys think?
That seems like a great way to do it. Like, if that's the approach, that makes a lot of sense. You probably get the best stuff that way, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of more organic.
And it also means that, you can... Readers who liked this work of yours will also like that work, because it's not something completely new. They don't have to relearn the world, the stories and the characters. It's sort of still within the same sphere. So they sort of feel comfortable. Oh, it's another story set in the same world. Oh, so that sort of gives them an in. So that's one of the huge benefits of spin-offs. Like The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. They're not sequels. That's a spin-off, really.
Actually, and now I'm going to be the nerd, I guess. It's not the spin-off. It's actually the prequel.
Oh yeah, that's true.
It's sort of prequeling, but it's not really prequeling? Because it's not like...
Well, the actual book is the one that came first, and then the story just simply continued into the next generation that actually had the rise of Sauron again and all these things.
Yeah, that's...
So that's like that's the linear progression of the story. It's not a spin-off.
Well,
What actually is a spin-off, I would say, is Peter Jackson's The
let's not talk about that
Hobbit,
crap.
where you have all sorts of characters doing whatever was in his mind, that had nothing to do with the original. And like of the trilogy of The Hobbit, I would say that 60% of all of that is a spin-off, just to still milk the world of Middle-earth.
I definitely see what you're saying, but from my perspective, when I read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, they seemed only tangentially related in that they had... Okay, you have Frodo... No, you have Bilbo having like a cameo in The Lord of the Rings. He's barely in there. And you have the necromancer who's sort of Sauron, but he wasn't really. He was like just the big bad from that character, and he was sort of made into being Sauron to sort of make them fit. So whereas like Peter Jackson might think, oh yes, the necromancer, this is like the true what was happening before, and you've got I don't know, video games and that sort of setup that sort of go into that and make it they sort of trying to show you actually what happened as the necromancer and like Sauron's spirit coming back, but really I don't think he was really thinking with the tie that strongly, Tolkien. That was like just a sort of an offhand part. Oh yeah, that's what Gandalf had to go away and do. It was taking care of something more important, while the hobbits had to, and the hobbit and the dwarves had to face all this crap over here. Yeah. Well, anyway, it's...
what is, and actually they are calling it officially spin-offs, I think.
Okay.
Are the new Game of Thrones series that are going to come out. Those are going to be genuinely spin-offs too. Just keep enjoying and exploring the world of Westeros and everything. I don't know how. I guess it will be still quite lucrative, but considering how the series crashed and burned with season 8. I'm not sure how much those are going to fly on the coattails of the original. I mean, unless they are a standalone on their own and they have their own thing to get across, and they make the audience trust the material again.
Yeah.
I would say.
I reckon you will definitely have adherence, because while that story that you're talking about, that was a very weak kind of end to that story, you still have people who want to live in the world, and you have that kind
yes,
of,
absolutely,
that goodwill. So, where am I going to get my fix of fantasy now? Where am I going to get, and I was invested in this world and I want to know more about it, and you have that. It's like Star Wars.
And it's not only that. Now the world now, just like in Star Wars, like these two settings, these two worlds are actually familiar, so you don't need to acclimate yourself.
Yeah.
Again, so spin-offs are easy in the sense that people know what to expect, and it's easier for the writers as well. They don't need to establish new things, and they don't need to re-establish the rules as well. Although often they are so confident with this that they forget what the rules were.
Yeah.
But that's a different thing. I would say that A spin-off has these advantages, and
It does. I mean, it can be very
approach it the right way, like a lot of the hard work is kind of done for you in development, right? But like that's so well put there that like the writers themselves have to know the rules, even though they're lucky enough to not have to establish them. They better know them, so they get it.
I mean, Star Wars, we always have that as an example, but it's a good example. That's why we have it. So, with Star Wars, I think that shows the benefits and the pitfalls of spin-offs. So one of the things is people really want continuations of stories, and they want to know, what the characters did and what the characters did before, and I want to see a linear progression. Even if we're going back, we get prequels or whatever, we're still on the same line. So you have that, but of course, then you have a lot of if you do that badly and you mess up the characters and you don't play to what people expect, then you fail really hard. Like, the prequels they aren't really well written, so they aren't a very good sort of take on, they don't put you back into the Star Wars world really. They sort of mess up the films that came after because they're so bad. But so the benefit of spin-offs is you're giving people another story from the same world, so people are familiar with it, you get the hit of it, but you don't have to risk messing up already established characters and timelines and stories and expectations, because you're just giving people a story in the world. So we have like Solo and Rogue One, which are really spin-off stories.
Yes.
And that is a lot more interesting. I'll go on.
No. Please finish.
No, I finished.
There's also they're doing that with the Harry Potter universe as well.
Oh, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them.
Yeah. And it's not a bad thing to do. I mean, especially when you have a world that is very... I call these worlds open architecture, in the sense that you can build more stuff within the particular framework of the world, and you can establish new things that haven't been explored before or weren't even mentioned before, but can conceivably be part of this particular world. I really like that. But the consistent issue that I tend to have with the spin-offs that are made in mainstream is that maybe that's an effect for having different writers write different spin-offs or whatever, but they don't seem to remember the main rules and the main feel of the world and the main trajectory, like the tangents that you are... It's like when you build perspective and you don't follow all the perspective lines, in a sense. And so the world starts looking wonky a little bit, and something starts being off because you are breaking this little rule and that little rule. And then this thing accumulates until nothing actually works as it used to, and it becomes a completely different world that is alien to the audience as well as the general lore of the story. That's a pitfall, in my opinion.
That happens like in mainstream comics. They do that. There's a lot of reasons for spin-offs in mainstream comics, but that is one thing that happens, and then they have to just introduce retcons in order to make things fit. And you have to do that. Like a retcon is like a bit of dodgy engineering work. Duct tape and WD-40 nails, smashing stuff until it actually fits in with the other stuff because it diverged too far. And that's what happens.
So yeah, like rule breaking and the retcon thing that's going on right now with a lot of people being unhappy with the new Star Trek series, Discovery and everything. Meanwhile, like look back at Next Generation in the 90s, which was super risky. And people were like, what, Star Trek? Like this many years later with no Kirk, no Spock? Like how's that going to work? And it became this massive thing Next Generation did, and with its own spin-offs that also went a full TV series running on the Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and then they went back prequel, I guess, with the one after that. I didn't really watch it. Enterprise,
yeah.
So that was like a dominant. I mean, that is like one of the massive achievements in spin-off, the world of spin-offs on TV. Was that in the 90s, all the Star Trek. Series.
It was for a while.
The next gen era,
You had 3 series running concurrently. Enterprise happened
you'd have movies,
afterwards, but
next gen movies, and DS9 and Voyager both going, and pretty much completely separated, like little fun crossovers every once in a while, but it was pretty rare. So kind of doing their own thing in the same universe. Pretty amazing.
This isn't like only a thing that happens. Sorry, my brain just froze. I forgot what I was going to say. So it's a symptom of being exhausted. So excuse me.
But these series stuck to the rules, sort of like the best Next Generation writers were massive fans of the original. And even though they expanded on the universe, and it was 100 years later, so you could, Kirk and Spock were legends, and they weren't mentioned very often either, but it was sort of laid in there that these were legendary kind of heroes. And it's the Enterprise ship 4 generations later. And it's what might the world be 100 years after all of that, So they had a lot of respect for what had come before, but were able to develop it. And then Next Gen has a spin-off, Deep Space Nine, which is set at the same time. They were very true to, who are the main aliens? And there were new discoveries there, too, but it was explained why these people didn't appear in other series. But they sort of went deeper into who are the main powers, who are the main alien kind of allies and enemies, and into all that stuff.
And it allowed them to tell Star Trek stories in a totally different way. So, as you know, the Enterprise is a spaceship, like in the original series, that can go anywhere, and you take the stories to a new planet or a new situation in space. Whereas the idea behind Deep Space Nine is things come to it rather than the people going off to a new place every time. So the story happens on the station, and so that was an interesting thing. And they had adventures, and then it was about wars and battles and stuff. But and then
it had its particulars, kind of this idea of more consequences because they're stuck in one place. So anything they do is going to kind of come back to haunt them in a way. They'll have ramifications to the decisions they make, and they wanted to be more serialized. So they did change things, and they went into lots of new territories and stuff like that. But it was still, and they stretched the idea of the noble kind of Starfleet officers, but they still kept that core, in my opinion. These were people who were trying to do right, who were,
the highest of the high sort of white knights. That's what they are.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Even though in some instances they pushed them to the limit, and even the hero pushed into these kind of gray areas here and there when he was up against the wall.
Oh yeah,
some great stuff there,
Captain Sisko. Yeah. But say Voyager again. So there's another attack where so that's like a classic spin-off in that. Oh, we're catapulted all the way across the galaxy. So now we have a whole different bunch of aliens to meet. So we don't have to follow any of the trod, stuff that we have from the other 2 series. We can do new things, and we can sort of have the energy of the original. It didn't quite work that well, but it found its feet eventually.
Right.
So it did sort of work as it grew. You've really got to stay with that damn show for the first 2 series until it sort of really gets good. So
right.
The thing is, if you're going to completely bend the world out of shape, then it's not a spin-off. You're just inspired by the original material, and you're creating something completely new. And it's more sincere, let's say, to market it this way. Like it's not going to be Harry Potter, guys. It's going to be Larry Potter. I don't
Larry
know.
Potter.
Something.
Oh God, yeah.
That sounds great. It'd be worth looking at. Something came out. Yeah. Like it'd be like Life of Brian or something.
It's Parry Potter.
Exactly.
That's the porn
Larry
version.
Potter. Yeah.
I remember when I was a kid and my eyes were in much better condition, so I read a lot of books, much more books than I read now, many more books. And I was a fan of Willow, the movie, a lot. Like it was one of my favorite movies as a kid. And I found this book as I was browsing in a bookshop that was supposed a sequel, like the follow-up, what happened to Elora Danan and Willow and everybody, like after the end of the movie. And I bought it, and I was very excited to see what was gonna happen. I wanted to see, Mad Mardigan and then Sorsa have their family or whatever it is they were gonna do, because they were crazy people anyway. But what happened was that they are all killed off in the first chapter.
Yeah.
Like the first chapter, dead. Everyone is dead except Elora.
Bait and switch.
Yeah. And then you have these new characters that nobody knows and nobody cares. Coming to take the position of the other dead ones that you loved. And then Elora grows up and she becomes a spoiled little brat. And you are extremely unhappy as a reader, because you have not only been robbed from the characters that you wanted to see more of, and basically that's what you were promised, but you also see that all this investment and sacrifice that went into this little baby just amounted to a kid that made, I don't know, Britney Spears look like the man. He was well behaved. Not Hannah Montana. Who is the other one that went off the rails?
Miley Cyrus.
Yes, that's the one. She looked like she made her look like she was out of the coven. So
that's a shame, because so you've got basically a spin-off pretending to be a sequel, and that is a bad thing. You don't want to mess with people's expectations like that, because spin-offs and sequels are slightly different animals, and don't want to confuse people. But we really have to talk about, they say, spin-offs in comics, I suppose, because we haven't mentioned that. We mentioned that in the video, but we've got to sort of talk about it in the QUACKCAST. All right, so did we do that in the video, in the QUACKCAST?
No.
Oh, okay,
I said that we did in the video. We mentioned it in the video.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so one of the main reasons for spin-offs in commercial comics, and you don't so much get that in webcomics, is that people want to keep their IP. They have, of course, and they want to, like, they have a universe. So you got the Marvel universe, the DC universe, or whatever. Everything has to fit in it. So you've got that. So everything has to be made to fit in. And that attracts readers, and you attract readers to your other titles by saying, there's more stories of the characters in the same universe. So that's how you sort of do that. But also, you've Superman started in like 1939 or something like this, and they're writing him. And then you have like other characters that sort of get popular with in conjunction with Superman, and then they get spun off into different stories, staying within the same universe. And you're basically paying writers and artists and everyone like that to keep on, to work on different titles, and within your universe, and maybe you've got like a really talented writer, and he wants to, or they want to do their own fun thing. You let them have their head and do their own, take on a character, or whatever, and they maybe would choose to spin off a character into their own work, into their own title. So that's how you get spin-offs, and then if it becomes popular enough, then they maintain it and keep on doing it, and then that gets a huge series in its own right. So that there's a commercial imperative, not just a creative one, for spin-offs in that commercial world. But in webcomics, it's not so much, because you have like single creators, or maybe you have a writer and an artist working together, and it's very hard for them to divert their energy into more things. The only way you don't have they can't just hand them off to someone else, like say, oh, you'll take over the spin-off. But it can happen sometimes within certain sort of conditions. So we have the Heroes Alliance comics. You have a whole bunch of creators getting together there to create like a shared universe, like the Marvel or DC universe, with all their own characters together. And sometimes someone creates a good character for them and they spin it off into their own comic version. So you do have that. You have writers who, creators who are really enjoying their work, and then they think, oh, hang on, I really like this character. So they finish the comic and then they go on with another character, like Pitface with Epica Blitzov, which is a spin-off of the same world, Septica. Well, from the Putrid Meat universe, basically. So we have it's sort of like a prequel, and also sort of spinning off, because it's sort of very, very different. It doesn't tell you what happened before the events of Putrid Meat. It's like a story from the same world, sort of set in a time many, many, centuries before the sequence of events in Putrid Meat. So yeah, so you do have that. In my own comic, Pinky TA, I've been writing that for a long time. If I have some kind of funky idea or whatever, it doesn't. Instead of spinning that off into a new, not spinning it off, but instead of creating a new comic based on that, I just sort of hammer it into Pinky TA. So that is not spinning off. That's like forcing my ideas to be part of the universe. But I did a spin-off in that. I wanted to do a fantasy story. I really wanted to do, I was so tired of doing Pinky TA, and I wanted to do fantasy, no more diesel punk sci-fi crap. I want to do fantasy, do that. And so instead of doing a comic in its own thing, myself and two other creators, we got together and we did this, a dream sequence. So Pinky TA goes into this world where she has to get this Buddha statue from this harpy, and there's to be this big fight or whatever. And instead of doing that as its own comic, that is like a spin-off of Pinky TA. And it was also a sort of a spin-off of the comics that they did as well. So you have Cats with her comic about a beaver thing, were-beaver. And then you had Aurora Moon, that's her name, with this comic about her Sailor Moon inspired character, and they all sort of hammered into the same world within a dream world. So yeah, I have done it. I've done a spin-off in the style you would get in the Avengers or the X-Men or something like that. So yeah, what about you guys? Have you seen it in webcomics, the whole spin-off thing? In your process of writing Brave Resistance, I know that is not a spin-off of Without Moonlight, but it's sort of like a spiritual spin-off in that you're sort of writing within the same time period.
Yeah, it's a spin-off in the sense I could say it's not a spin-off. It's a completely different standalone story.
Yeah, but it's the same world and the same time period in a way.
Yeah, the reason I wrote it was because I wanted something that was more light-hearted compared to more like light-hearted and less bound. To this grimness. And I wanted to write something that felt more like an adventure and more like something that was fun, let's say, more fun than, like, Without Moonlight for me is a lot of fun, but often it is also very harrowing in the sense that I have to write about things that are very traumatic.
Just before we get into anything else, we had a little bit of a hiccup there, so we've had to do a bit of an edit. So I'll just make that clear. I just remembered something. So I was sort of mentioning in Picky TA that I sort of, instead of doing spin-offs, I sort of like hammer ideas back into the comic. But that's not necessarily true. I do sort of... Picky TA is sort of like a conglomeration of spin-offs, in that I sort of did my main story and finished it. You know, it had an ending with some... particular ending, and then instead of like carrying on from that story and doing another thing that carries on, I sort of did a weird kind of prequel-y thing where I had written a short story, and it's sort of based in the past, and I introduce a whole bunch of new characters, and they have this adventure in the desert in tanks and that kind of stuff. It's chapter 6 of Pinky TA, it is. And that sort of is a spin-off, really, because it's not really a prequel. It doesn't inform you anything about what happens in the future of the stories. It's just a new story in its own right. And I did that as a way of, making myself more interested in it and having a bit more fun. I don't have to keep on building and building and building. So spin-offs often can allow you to a lot more freedom. You're not sort of trapped within this whole big setup stuff. You can sort of start anew that way without completely starting anew. And that's also the part of the comic that I use to introduce new people to it. I don't say, oh yeah, read through where it started on, page 1. I give them chapter 6 because it's like a crystallized version of that. My writing style is a lot better. My art is a lot better. And so that's what I choose. And they don't have to sort of, read through all the beginning stuff to get into it. They just have this nice little package that finishes up, and you're not sort of chained to a big thing. So Tance, you were just sort of talking about your character, your writing, and you did the same sort of thing. So
yes, I actually had, for those that don't know already, because I tend to mention it often, I am a novelist actually, and I write fantasy. And I have this trilogy that has had the following, and people ask me to write more about certain characters that are prominent in the story, but they are not the central character. And you don't get to know their history very much, especially because most of my more popular characters also tend to be very tight-lipped about themselves. So I wrote a spin-off about one of the supporting characters, let's say. They are main, but not the main character. And it was basically a series of short stories meant to give us snapshots of the particular character in very key points of his life, very specific years of his life, where milestones that are being fleetingly referred to but never actually described happen in real time before us. Okay, so this was the spin-off. That was the spin-off. That's one thing. And for my patrons, now for Without Moonlight, I also write small illustrated stories about characters that may not be with us anymore, and people still want them around. And not only that, I mean, there are backgrounds that will not be addressed in the main story because it would be basically info dump. It would offer nothing to the story itself in canon. But as a standalone story to explore other things, it's interesting. So I'm going to be writing those as well. So
it's if you like the characters, it's good to learn more about them and have them a deeper insight into them and the world they exist in and their point of view. So yeah, there's so many different reasons for doing spin-offs, isn't there? You know, there's commercial imperatives like you have with the commercial comics. Retaining readers. You have that like a more spiritual imperative in that you want to write it within the same world because you're sort of connected to the characters. There's also a creative imperative in that you want to do more in your world and you want to have more freedom to do it, but you don't want to start something totally new. So there's so many different reasons for doing it. So I like that. It's not a single thing. Go on.
I also write spin-offs that I will never publish. But they are very good for inspiration. I wrote a little bit about it in today's article. And I place the characters of the comic in other timelines. And, like, for example, they are not in World War II anymore, but they are in modern times. Or they are not in modern times, they are around the 70s, depending on what I want to explore. And that is a very fun experiment. Not only because you get to imagine things that, are meme-like, what would Fotis write if he had social media or something like that. That sort of thing, or imagine Nikos's Twitter from Brave Resistance and what he would be, all the zingers that he would be writing and stuff like that. This is very fun for me, but it also helps me get inspired and expand the character in canon. So these spin-offs are great for the writer, and it gets you to feel very familiar with your own brain children, in a sense.
Your brain children.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can grow them that way. Yeah, it can be a lot of fun, enlightening. Baines, what about you? Are you aware of many webcomic spin-offs? Or?
Not that I've really seen. No, I mean just that you guys have already mentioned Pitt's thing.
Pitt's thing.
Yeah, Pitt's thing.
It's huge.
Awesome
thing.
I've done like what if, like the Halloween things that are sort of I don't know if those would technically be called spin-offs again, but puts the same characters into the either they're still in their own environment, but something supernatural happens, and I'm allowed to kill the characters, and like anything can happen. Or in one, I took Oscar and TK and stuck them back in an Edgar Allan Poe setting to do a little parody of Casco and Amontillado. So I can sort of change them around and put them in different things. So those are kind of spin-offs. I did one long kind of ghost story, which was not necessarily canon, but people can make that determination. But I think it's non-canon, where Abigail encounters a ghost. Sort of. And like you were saying earlier, Oz, like that allows you to sort of have a story with a beginning, middle, and actually having an end. Yeah. Using your same characters, so I really like it on that level. And going into the Halloween stuff, I'm doing one now that is a sort of a meta, like a weird sort of fantastical story. It's probably fits in that category too. So yeah, on that level, yeah. People have suggested spinning off. Like I had a friend suggest that Penelope could be. Like, you could just take her out and put her in any setting. Like, just put her out on the road or put her in a new life. It's like, she's so great. Like, people like her. I'm like, yeah, but I like her in this environment with the other characters. I think that's where she really works, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think I would do that.
Not in that's another thing. Yeah. Maybe sometimes the spin-off wouldn't work if you have only the character that is the most popular or the one that people deny. that people actually demand, we want more of this character. And if you single that character out from the rest of the cast, maybe they don't have the same effect anymore because they don't have those other characters to bounce off and create the atmosphere. People like
that happens.
Another thing.
Exactly.
That does happen. You have many movies and you have many TV shows that happen to. They fail. People have pilot episodes of this and that. Okay, let's do this version of MASH with just these characters. No, it doesn't work. And that happens many, many times when people try and grow their property that way. And just because people like the characters or whatever, they don't necessarily want to see them new worlds. Like sitcoms. There's been surprisingly a huge amount of spin-offs of sitcoms. Of course, we have the original. We have the American Graffiti film by George Lucas, Mr. Spin-off King, and Happy Days sort of comes out of that spiritually. You could say Star Wars sort of comes out of that in that as one of the same actors, but you have Harrison Ford, of course, but you have the Happy Days, and then you've got Mork and Mindy and Joni and Chachi, and
Laverne and Shirley.
Laverne and Shirley, yeah, of course. And I always thought that the Happy Days was a spin-off of Archie. I was convinced it was.
Oh yeah, it's got that kind of.
Yeah, I thought Jughead was Potsy, who was. It just. I thought, Archie was what's his name with the red hair? From Richie, yeah. I thought that was all connected.
Yeah,
but it
does fit. It's got the same kind of feel. Yeah.
Set in the same period as well, leather jackets and everything. So it naturally fits. So you've got all that. You have Cheers, and then you have Frasier, which is a very different show, but it is a spin-off of that series, which is hard to believe, but it is. Yeah. So it's a popular thing in all media. You have spin-offs, and it can be really nice to see those connections. It's like it's weird when you think, oh my god, Mork and Mindy is a spin-off of Happy Days, but Happy Days is set in the 1950s. Mork and Mindy is set in the 80s when it was actually made. So how does that work? But it does. And it's lovely to see those connections with this and that and everything. And, I mean, that's a really dated reference, but it's still, like, it happens.
I think
it's real.
I think the kids are clamoring for more exposure of Joni Loves Chachi. They want to know.
Well,
what went wrong?
Why? Well, we have the Archie is a super famous thing that's still going on today with its Riverdale. It's it's a TV series. Really is a spin-off from the comic. That it's not just in a different media. It is a spin-off, I would say. And then we have we had Josie and the Pussycats, which was like it became a cartoon and it was really popular. Archie became a cartoon. Archie was a comic, and spin-offs into new things. I think you had Josie and the Pussycats as a modern spin-off as well from the Riverdale TV series. I'm not sure about that, but I don't follow it. Do you? You guys don't follow it either?
No, not really.
No.
But I mean, I know they also have Sabrina the Witch.
Yes.
From Archie, and that's been a couple of iterations on TV, and there's a new one on TV.
And speaking of TV series spin-offs, I'm gonna take it in a completely different direction. If you like police dramas, which is something I really like, so there was this. I'm not sure if it was very popular. I liked it, and I don't know. I discovered it and liked it. I don't know how popular it was. It was called The Closer. It was about this Texan detective sort of lady that worked in the police, and she always closed the case, and that's why she was called The Closer. And she had a very interesting and amusing character and personality, because she was very, very serious, but she was also a klutz, and she sort of walked into situations without being like a Mr. Bean sort of character. She was things that happened to her were the things that happened to everyday life to people, like she would try to do something and something would break down when she wanted it, and she would have this conniption about it and stuff like that. So she felt very much like an everyday character, is what I'm saying. So I really liked it, and she had this main rival in the story, like not a villain, but an antagonist. And the antagonist was another woman that was the complete opposite of this one. Like she was bend the rules, she went out of the box. The other one was very, by the book, textbook, wanted everything to be exactly right, paperwork, blah, blah, blah. And so when the series ended, they created the spin-off with the main character being the antagonist this time.
Oh, right.
And that was called Major Crimes, I think.
Oh, never heard of that one.
I only laughed because I thought
for a very long time.
Okay. Yeah.
But I think it was called Major Crimes, and everyone remained the same except for the leading lady that, according to the story, she retired, and so the one that took her place was the antagonist. But she had the entire team that she was going to direct still aligned with the previous one. So she had to earn the trust of this team that hated her and all these things. So the entire first season was about her doing things her way. She didn't try at all to be like the previous commander. And how the team came to actually appreciate her and, become again a unit with her.
Yeah.
So that was a spin-off, but they didn't try to just redo the same thing that was successful in the previous series. They kept the world, they kept the situations, they kept the recipe, let's say, but they completely changed the style of the main character. And that was very, very interesting to me. So I like both series equally.
Okay, it wasn't just
especially if they actually took the pains to make all the other characters adjust to this new boss. And
yes, and
that's really cool, actually.
Yeah, they kept every single thing that they hated about her. They kept in the story. She didn't change as a character at all, and neither did the other guys. So they had to find different ways of communication to actually again begin to appreciate each other and stuff.
Right.
But it still retains the same kind of the world and everything.
Yeah.
It just changes the story completely. That's a good way of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love it when they do that kind of thing. I can't think of many other examples, but there are TV series that franchise. They take spin-off to a whole new level. So we mentioned Star Trek.
Well, like the CSI thing, I guess, is the
CSI, Law and Order, NCIS. When Tan said police drama spin-off, I thought, yeah, CSI, NCIS, Law and Order. They do that.
There's I've never watched the show, but there's The Good Wife.
And now there is this new. At least I have just come across it, and I'm gonna check it out because I also liked the character. There was this courtroom drama series called Suits that I'm sure nobody watched. I really liked it, although it's completely unrealistic how lawyers behaved. Not outside the courtroom. Outside the courtroom, I have actually seen things like this happen, but inside the courtroom, not so much. Anyway, but now that particular series ended, and they have created a new series where the main character is one of the main quasi-antagonists. She was not an antagonist; she was on the side of the good guys, quote unquote. But she was the blip in the outfit. Let's say she was a tough person to be with. Let's say. So, and I liked her, and now they are making a spin-off with her as the main character. So that's going to be interesting, I think. I hope at least. Yeah.
I like that creative takes on so many different things. You can get a lot from spin-offs. I like the subject. Pitface, thank you for that idea. So we should wrap it up now, I suppose. This has been a fascinating discussion of the different ways you can have a spin-off and all the different ways you can use them. Thank you, guys. Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. And thank you, listeners. All right. We'll be back next week for something else. Okay. Bye-bye.